Let me thank Jeff and the church wardens for inviting me to share a message, um, as Jeff indicated, from the heart. What I do is try to combine that with some of the activities that I've been involved in, most recently as well. First of all, let me acknowledge and appreciate that it's a significant thing for us to celebrate Black History Month. Yes, I know there's many discussions about whether or not is it necessary. Um, I, I understand both sides of the arguments in terms of all history is all of us history. Whether or not we are black, white, First Nations, Canadians, um, it's all part of our history. However, when something is so glaring that there's the exclusion of some persons from the history books of our time, or when the history is written in a way that undermines who people are as human beings. Robinson at Emmanuel College wrote in one of the Toronto School of Theology journal that some of the problems with the residential schools was a result of the writings to say that the First Nations people were less than the Europeans, the white Europeans. In the same way, black history will become necessary because part of our problem is the exclusion, the fact that many blacks are invisible. For me, I appreciate it. I'm not saying only for the month of February that we should celebrate Black History Month. As a matter of fact, with what happened recently in the United States, with the Floyd killing, murder really, and various other episodes, the fellow jogging in Georgia, and the people came and just murdered this fellow because he's black. No matter what you're doing, people apprehend persons who are criminals and bring them to justice. But there's a difference with some of these incidents. It's almost like you go and lynch something. People have little value. Um, the so we really need to come to grips in a substantive way about what is happening in our society. And last year was in my thoughts and based on what I was following over the many years, I thought it was mild, but I'm concerned because what continues to happen is that sometimes people want to sugarcoat the reality of the effects of slavery, of one human being owning another human being, and then over time slavery is gone, and then people are saying to get over it. There's a book by that is post-traumatic slave disorder. Nobody takes that on, but the reality that is an issue. Many people are affected by it. Not to mention the United States has a history of it too as well. Whether it is from the ending of slavery to the Jim Crow era and so on. In Canada, people think that Canada didn't have slavery. One of my friends did a thesis on some history of that. When you look at the history, many Canadians who sought for freedom left Canada because to get freedom, and they went to the United States. Some of them, of course, left from Canada and went to Africa to regain their freedom and so on. So having said all of that, I have to discuss and argue about Black History Month is not so much the key thing for me. The key thing for me is recognition that as we are a community of God, we know what has happened. The first church I was appointed as an assistant curate in St. Anne's Bay in Jamaica. As soon as I was appointed, I went to have dinner with the community. They highlighted that one of one person there who was a racist, one of the English fellas who was on the list. I don't remember his name now, but it was so significant for the people of the community to highlight that this fellow was a racist. Um, from there, of course, eventually I did came back to Canada, and did I got involved with the community and so on, and from the experiences that I went through in the church, it became real to me that we need to address the real problems of slavery. What has happened in the church is that the church has normalized systemic racism. Racism is not only about racial prejudice. Racial prejudice is when you dislike one group because of in whatever. That's prejudice is a different thing. Racism is when power is attached to this prejudice. So what you do, you have a situation like one Dudley, this fellow, this Jamaican guy who spent significant amount of time doing research on carding until eventually the Toronto police dealt with it. The truth of the matter is, even in the school system, the Ford government had passed something about the question of streaming youngsters. Many visible minority, black persons, were streamed in a way that they were getting a lower level of access in terms of educational training. No, this is to say to you that the church must play a significant role. I think the church has a critical role to play to address systemic anti-black racism faced in our denomination, and for that matter, throughout Canada, the world. Whatever the gospel, wherever the gospel is proclaimed for that matter. As part of the Anglican Church of Canada, I'm aware of the existing programs that the Diocese of Toronto has started in terms of contracted co-culture to do some work over here. They'll work to have persons who within the church listening groups. They have listened to one group I'm a part of, which is the Black Anglicans of Canada. I serve on the leadership team of that group. And it's a recognition that we need to address these issues. The church has to be there because these disparities are unjust. And as Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in his famous letter from Birmingham City Jail, stated that I am in Birmingham because injustice is there. I'm involved in Black Anglicans because injustice is quite obvious. And it is something that we need to address. It is no longer acceptable and must never be acceptable that we have systemic racism in a way that it is so normalized that one person said a black warden is worth half of a white warden. That's not what a church is. Jesus didn't come for that. This Hebrew, Jewish, Middle Eastern fellow didn't come and say anything about that the church is supposed to have these kind of prejudice as its normalcy. One thing we recognize that as Christians, we came into the world to save and redeem humanity. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer states quite well, the new human being lives in the world like anyone else. So we are redeemed in the world and we are a part of the world. And that Dietrich Bonhoeffer I quoted from is from his volume 6 of his writings on ethics. These human beings are the people redeemed by Christ and therefore are to act to seek to fulfill the call for the world's redemption. The church, in my estimation, is well aware of the disparities and is required to act. We in the Black Anglicans of Canada have written an 18-point letter to the diocesan, Bishop Andrew Asbill, asking them to address 18 things that are of urgency. June 2020, we wrote these letters in light of what had happened in the groundswell that came as a result of the Floyd killing and so on. There was a need for us to now be more specific. This is the actions on Black Anglicans of Canada is nothing new, really, because there have been groups within the church under the leadership of the Black Anglicans Coordinating Committee that have done things, including the Black History Month Heritage Services for the over 25 years. There have been studies done on this matter. The national church had this No Longer Strangers done by Romney Mosley, who died sadly at St. Michael and All Angels in West Toronto. So these are nothing new that we are recognizing that there have been studies done and things need to be addressed. Therefore, the rallying cry of the church is our own, which is that the Spirit of the Lord is upon us because He has anointed us, anointed me, anointed you as a people of God to preach good news to the poor. He has sent us to proclaim release to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Now so my message is really clear, that we need, the church stands in with so many other causes. I will not go into list. But when it comes to racial prejudice and racism and all that, the church has been mostly silent. Yes, this could be as a part of the fact that we are in a majority white church. So as Anglicans, the tendency is to defer to whites. That's not acceptable. Jesus didn't say, but defer to whites, defer to Indians, defer to Chinese, defer to blacks, defer. No. We are the people of God, and we need to live as community, as the family of God. And as we care for each other, so we seek to address it. Within the world, there is in the world there is the racism is recognized. My apologies. Racism is a sin that has been accepted and normalized in the church. Immediate action is required to dismantle anti-black racism and all forms of exclusion, oppression from the church. This urgent work must include recognition and reconciliation to bring about healing. Within the United Nations has the Declaration for People of African Descent from 2015 to 2024. Was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly and adopted in 2013. The theme of the International Decade is People of African Descent, Recognition, Justice, and Development. Now, somebody is going to say, why do we need that? Because many of the history we don't know. I'll just throw one thing into your thoughts. You don't know what happened in Namibia. I don't know if you're aware of what the Belgians did to some of the African countries. There's so much history, but I'm not here to pack history into this. I'm saying as of today, the church is to do something. If we are not aware of it, part of our action is to become aware, to become active, and to constantly renew ourselves as the church, and to seek to proclaim God's will. The gospel reading this morning, there's a gospel reading of Jesus going into the house, and Peter's mother-in-law wasn't well, and he healed them. The church is recognizing illnesses and failings. And when it's recognizing it in ourselves, we ourselves must take the opportunity to repent and not to bury our heads in the sand. I recognize that sometimes the effects of slavery, and even the government of Canada has produced some materials that recognize that for many blacks there's also internalized oppression. So you, having faced that significantly, you and being over policed and all this, and always born a crime because you're black, born a crime. There's a recognition that many people need to be enabled to stand up, to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is for all of us. The final little thing I'll say, and I'm probably not quoting Cuba so much, but Cuba, after the revolution, recognized that blacks were treated unfairly. And they spent more than significant amount of resources, they place significant amount of resources to bring the society as best as possible equal. We, I'm not placing what you call it, my trust in human beings alone. I place my trust in God because God is a solution for all lives. Martin Luther King came with a prophetic voice, and so it is today. We need to have a prophetic voice in the world, and the church is to lead that, be on the vanguard. Amen.